Okay, so just as a disclaimer, I want to mention that information that I'm sharing today with you is really done for educational purposes only, and that it should not substitute or not be considered to substitute psychotherapy or medical advice from a professional. Start to get curious about the history of diet culture, especially learning about the roots of diet culture, which are actually very sexist and racist at their core. Definitely encourage you to read Anti-Diet by Christy Harrison, as well as listen to her podcast, Food Psych. So another thing that I find that's really helpful is to practice media literacy, which means to critically evaluate media that's being consumed. Which, by the way, just so you know, the diet industry makes something like $62 billion annually in the US alone. So there's a lot of money involved in making us believe that there's something wrong with our bodies. So when we look at social media feeds, for instance, we can start asking ourselves questions like, do I feel better or do I feel worse when I look at this? What about other people in my life? How would they feel looking at this? Would they feel more anxious, more ashamed? Would they want to compare themselves more? Who's profiting from me believing in this message, and who's advertising here? Does this message seek to profit off of my insecurities by selling me a solution to try to fix my flaws? What kind of an audience is this message trying to target? And does it promote or reinforce distorted ideals of what bodies and faces are supposed to look like through digital manipulation, or featuring only one body type or one type of look? Then based on that, we can decide if we want to do a social media cleanse, right? That's something that I do a lot with my clients, especially at first, taking a week or two just to simply not do any social media and see if there's any change in terms of emotional responses. And then we can maybe choose to unfollow certain accounts that can be particularly triggering, or that promote the idea that there's something wrong with our bodies and that we need to change them. I think it's also helpful because there's a strong counter movement happening on social media as well to add more body diversity to our feed, and to have more images of normal people, but especially having images of people in larger bodies doing normal things and being happy. There's lots of research that shows the benefits of eating in an intuitive manner. I feel like it's definitely worth checking out. And finally, I would try to focus on practices that will foster embodiment instead of self-objectification. So self-objectification happens when we learn to monitor and understand our bodies from an outside perspective. So as a result of living in an environment that views people's bodies as objects, right? And embodiment instead tries to teach us to come home to our bodies. So learning and understanding our bodies from an inside perspective. So this can look like making food choices based on how we feel, instead of what we're told that we should be eating, choosing to move our bodies because of how we feel when we move our bodies instead of how much calories we'll burn, or choosing an outfit based on how we feel in the clothes instead of what other people will think when we wear the clothes. So those are a few tips.
Thank you for that insight. There's a lot of information that I personally didn't know about. I was wondering what your take was on body positivity and body neutrality movements, like your professional opinion on both movements.
Right. So body positivity, has been a movement to try to shift the unrealistic feminine beauty standards to be a little more inclusive, more realistic, right? So the idea behind it is all bodies are beautiful. You can think of campaigns like the Dove campaigns. So it's something that I think we see oftentimes. There's been a lot of criticism on this movement, and I have to say I agree with a lot of it, which is that there's way too much focus on appearance still when it comes to body positivity. That, we know that negative body image comes not just from the thin ideals that we're exposed to, but also just from messages that our value as human beings are derived from our appearance. And, when even if we broaden our models of beauty, we're continuing to objectify our bodies and reinforce the idea that our appearance is the most important thing about us. So yeah, I understand the criticism for sure. Body neutrality instead tries to focus more on loving and honoring our bodies no matter what. So really focusing on recognizing our body's functions, what our body can do for us, and to look at our bodies more objectively. So by getting curious about the inner workings of it and developing more appreciation for what it does. So me personally, I try to take an approach that's a little more integrative and more nuanced to both concepts. I tend to lean a little more on the side of body neutrality in terms of a preference, but I think that there's also some space to incorporate flexibly, I would say, body positivity, because I think that we can care about our appearance. We might enjoy like dressing nicely, feeling attractive, but that's only a small part of how we should relate to our bodies. Ultimately, our bodies are our homes. If we spend all of our time caring for what it looks like on the outside, we're missing out on this whole rich experience of being and living in our bodies. So that's really a shame. So something that's a little more nuanced, more flexible, I would say.
One final question that I would end with would be, how can you approach a friend who you believe is living with eating disorder, and how can you support them? And how can we be more sensitive and cautiously address each of these struggles?
Right. Okay, so of course this is a complicated question because we want to voice our concerns, and we want to do it also in a way that's delicate and sensitive, so as a way of not shaming our friend. Also, I think something that's important here is to highlight the implications that an eating disorder can have on a person. I don't think that's something that we've discussed too much. There's a lot of myths around eating disorders and as being something, people get over and that's like a phase. But actually, that's not what the research seems to show. Actually, what we see is that when they go untreated, eating disorders can be quite chronic and severe, having some serious implications on mental and physical health. And it's actually the disorder with the types of disorders with the highest mortality rates of all mental illnesses. So not something to be underestimated. It's quite serious to have. So my first take would be gather your facts, be really objective in terms of changes in behaviors that you've noticed. So for instance, if you've seen your friend, purging, using laxatives, over-exercising, or getting extremely anxious about food, about their bodies, being more irritable, more tired, talking negatively about like other people's bodies and their own, tracking, weighing themselves every day or many times a day, not being able to miss a workout, avoiding certain situations because of the food that they'll be eating, then that's something that you can express kind of openly that's something that you're noticing. Here, of course, it can be like a nuance in terms of differences between different genders. So we know that men in general tend to experience eating disorders in a bit of a different way. Men will typically focus more on muscularity and on over-exercising to points that are quite dangerous. But there's also more stigma that's associated with men in general, as a lot of the times eating disorders are viewed as, women's disorders. And so there might be a lot more resistance. Actually, a lot of the times when men get referred for eating disorder treatment, there's more medical complications with their condition. So abnormal lab tests, injuries related to the eating disorder while over-exercising, things like that. And then for people who struggle with other gender, people with other genders who struggle with eating disorders, there might be some differences too in the ways that the eating disorder is expressed, the function of it. So sometimes it's more of an attempt to feel safer in a body in which, person wants to express their identity as more, want their bodies to reflect more of an androgynous type of expression of their gender. And so having an eating disorder becomes a way of feeling safer in their bodies. So it could be kind of noticing, simply like the negative implications that these changes in behaviors are having and what you're noticing in terms of your friend's changed behaviors. So once you've kind of gathered this information, I think it's also important to share how you feel about it, right? That you feel concerned, that you feel sad for the way that they've changed. Maybe you're feeling anxious about, what's to come. And then you can express, your desire for them to get some help. So saying, eating disorders are a big beast to work with, and oftentimes receiving specialized help can be really beneficial. And then reinforcing how beneficial this might be for them and for your relationship. So from there on, I would say, they might not take your advice right away, and don't take it personally. A lot of the times denial is part of an eating disorder, a certain amount of resistance to see, like how bad things are going. So it might take your friends some time to come to terms with what's happening, but you planted a seed, right? So just kind of being up, just kind of like being okay with that, I want to say. And then from there on, there's other things you can do to support your friend. You can listen, you can be a good source of support. You can learn more about the eating disorders that they're struggling with to develop more knowledge, more empathy. You can provide distraction or emotional support during mealtime in particular. This is an extremely difficult time for people. So if you're able to make that experience a little less hard, that can go a long way. You can help protect them from diet talk or body talk, right? Especially in the earlier stages of recovery. People with eating disorders can be quite vulnerable. And finally, you can tell them how you appreciate them outside of their appearance, right? When people struggle with eating disorders, they're convinced that their self-worth lies in their appearance. So by talking about what you like about them outside of the eating disorder, you're kind of creating a disruption in this narrative, and you're helping them focus on external reasons outside of their appearance, why you're friends with them and you care about them. So yeah, those are some ideas in terms of things you could do.
Well, that marks the end of this episode. We'd like to thank Dr. Melisa Arias-Valenzuela again for taking the time to do this interview with us and answer these questions that students had. I think the student community is really going to benefit from the different resources that you have provided us with today and the advice that you have provided us. If you are interested in learning more about her work, you can follow her at Dr. Mel and at Uprise Psychology Wellness, which is a project she's currently working on. Stay tuned for our next episode, and if you want to be up to date with our upcoming episodes and learn more about our club, please follow us on Instagram at UofTMHA. Thank you very much, and that's the end of the episode.
Thank you for having me.